A very warm good evening to one and all who is watching this particular live webinar. My name is Dr. Geo Fernandez, and I work as a faculty with the Department of Oil and Gas in the College of Management and Economic Studies. It's a pleasure to welcome you all for the particular webinar. The question comes is, why oil and gas? Oil and gas, when I look into, let's say, is a building block of our life, or let's say of whatever is going to support to sustain our life. Starting from the time I get up in the morning, I use a polyvinyl chloride, a PVC product, let's say toothbrush, for brushing my teeth, which basically comes from naphtha, which is a petroleum product. That is, naphtha being the raw material used in a petrochemical industry gives us PVC. Let it be the clothes that you wear, which is a mixture of both polyester and cotton. The polyester is basically a petrochemical product, wherein the raw material being used is again naphtha, which is a petroleum product. Let it be the transportation fuels that I'm going to use in the morning to go to office or to reach a particular destination. Let it be petrol, let it be diesel. Again, a petroleum product that I'm dependent upon. Let's look at the breakfast I'm going to have. I need to use again LPG, which is a petroleum product. So when I talk about oil and gas, I could assume, or I could say that these are the building blocks which support to sustain our life. In today's webinar, I will be concentrating, or I will be trying to discuss about the challenges and opportunities that's been faced by the oil and gas sector today. Let's look at the contents that we are discussing. Today, in my presentation, I would be first discussing about the global scenario, and going further, I will discuss about what is happening in India in the oil and gas sector. Post discussing the global and Indian oil and gas scenario, I would be looking at the challenges and opportunities that this sector currently has. And once I discuss the challenges and opportunities, how these challenges could be converted to an opportunity by the young generation, that is us, would be discussed here, and how the UPS is unique, supporting that vision of converting these challenges to opportunities. Post this, we will look into the role and opportunity of an oil and gas manager in information technology enabled services industry. Let's first look into the global oil and gas scenario. Today, we have been listening, or we have been reading on the media a lot about crude oil and how it is affecting the economies of various countries. Crude oil is a commodity which has been required by most of the countries that is available, most of the countries. Unfortunately, the distribution of these oil reserves has been to majorly to certain parts of the world. Over a period of time, from 1995 to 2015, you could see that the oil reserves that we have been increasing. In the year of 1995, we had a proved oil reserve of about 1,909, we have about 1,126.2 thousand million barrels. Whereas today, or let's say in the year of 2015, we have a total of 1,697.6 thousand million barrels. Whereas when I start looking into the 3 years that has been shown here, the majority of the oil reserves that is present is basically in the Middle Eastern region, followed by the South and Central American countries, followed by the North American continent. Whereas when I look at in this particular graphical representation, what I could see is Asia Pacific, which is considered to be one of the major consumers, or let's say the second, third, and fourth consumer in the world, China, India, and Japan. Unfortunately, our reserves is very less compared to what the other consumers or producers are. And because of this, you could listen or you could read in the media that oil is one such commodity which could be used as a weapon. And I think you would have a reading over a period of time that the OPEC countries were not interested to reduce their production in the last 1 or 2 years. And OPEC majorly consists of these major resource holders, and OPEC is having these major resource holder countries. When I'm going to look at the production versus consumption by region, the previous slide was basically discussing about the reserve holders. That means who has a major reserves. Now let's look into the production versus the consumption by region. When I'm going to look at this particular chart, we could, on the left hand side, we could see that the Africa and Middle East are producing crude oil than what is their requirement. That means when I'm going to look at the right hand side of the chart here, that is consumption by region, I could actually see a mismatch. When I'm going to look at North America, approximately it is similar. That means North America is producing approximately about in the number range of 20 million barrels per day, whereas their consumption is about 22. That means they are importing some of the crude oil requirement that they have. Whereas when I'm going to look at Asia Pacific, that's been shown in yellow color here, the production in the Asia Pacific region is very smaller. That comes to be approximately 10 million barrels per day, whereas the consumption that I'm going to look here is approximately 30 million barrels per day. That means I need to import my requirement. And the major support that I'm getting is from the Middle East as well as from the Middle East. Africa is also producing more than what was their requirement is, and they are again an exporter who exports to the countries that are in need. Now let's look at the gas reserves. Here the scenarios are similar when I'm looking at the major reserve holder, that means the Middle East, whereas when I'm going to look at the Europe and Eurasia, let's take an example of Russia. In Europe, we can think of Groningen reserves. They comes to be the second major reserve holders. When I'm gonna look at the consumption, the production versus the consumption, North America, Europe and Eurasia are the major producers as well as the major consumers of natural gas. Whereas if you look at Asia Pacific, over a period of time, we started consuming, or we started increasing our demand for natural gas because the Asian countries are now in a thought process to shift from a crude oil based economy to a natural gas based economy. Now let's look at the demand projections that we have here. When I'm gonna look at this particular slide here, the population and the GDP. When I'm going to look at this, the population and the income growth are the two great key drivers that would be behind the demand of primary energy in the year of 2030. By 2030, the population is going to reach approximately about 7.2 billion, which means from the level of 2015, it's an additional zero point 0.9 billion people, and this extra zero point 0.9 billion people requires energy. Even though we are talking about the renewable energy, the nuclear energy, that is going to come up in a great way, but the oil, the natural gas, and the coal is going to maintain its market share. When I'm gonna look at the growth in the primary energy, 36% of additional global consumption is going to increase from the levels of 2010 to the level of 2030. And primary energy being my crude oil, or let's say my fossil fuels. So as to meet the demand of this zero point 0.9 billion extra people that is going to come up in another 15 years, I need an additional of 36% of energy. And this is where the demand, if there is a demand for the crude oil, natural gas, or any other primary energy, obviously there is a need for people who is going to explore and to produce and to market those products to the general public. Let's look at the Indian oil and gas scenario. We have gone through the global oil and gas scenario, who are the major consumers, who are the major producers, and who has the major reserves. Now let's look at the Indian scenario. Where exactly do we stand? These are some of the important information I thought would add value to the presentation. We are the third largest consumer of oil in the world, and this data is of 2015. US with approximately 19.2 million barrels of oil per day, going to China, and then comes to India, about 4.2 million barrels per day of oil requirement. And out of this 4.2, we are only producing domestically about zero point 0.8 million barrels. That means the rest of the gap that we have seen needs to be fulfilled by imports. Another important information that I would like to share is we are the fourth largest LNG importer. Out of my demand of approximately 50.2 billion cubic meter of natural gas, approximately 42% of that number was being imported. And we are the second largest refiner in Asia. As of date, we have about 230.066 million metric tons per annum of refining capacity. That means, which is about 15% of surplus refining capacity, which would help us to export our petroleum products. And over this 230, we are planning to come up with another 70 million metric tons per annum, and making it to a total refining capacity of 310 million metric tons per annum by the year of 2020. The numbers that I have given in the last slide, you could actually see it here. When I'm going to look at the crude oil, if you look at the first graph on the left hand side, The bar graph in the year of 2015 shows that my demand is approximately 4.2 million barrels of oil, whereas my domestic production was less than, or let's say it's approximately zero point 0.8 million barrels per day. That means I need to import the rest of the requirement, or to fill up the gap, the rest has to be imported. And when I'm going to look at a compounded annual growth rate of my demand since 2011, it is going at a growth rate of 4%, whereas my domestic production is decreasing at minus 1%. That means you could expect that by 2030, the demand supply gap, that means the demand lies somewhere here, whereas my domestic supply lies somewhere here. This particular gap of domestic supply and the domestic demand is going to be on a bigger scale compared to what we have seen in 2015. Whereas when I'm going to look at the right chart here, the right hand side chart here, which is of natural gas, my domestic production is decreasing at a growth rate of a compounded annual growth rate of minus 10%. Whereas here you could see the demand is decreasing. Actually, the demand is not decreasing here. Actually, I am making my demand as per the supply. Unfortunately, due to the non-availability of infrastructure. That means natural gas supply is there, but once I get the LNG, I need to regasify it back to natural gas so that I could consume it. In the sense my country could consume it, but due to the infrastructure developments, I'm not able to import more and more LNG. And that is the reason why the government has come up with the gas allocation policy, which says that whatever gas we have or whatever supply of gas we have as of date, a particular percentage needs to be shared with the power industry. Suppose that a certain percentage goes to the fertilizer industry and a certain percentage goes to city gas distribution, which is basically the CNG and the PNG, and then the supply goes to the other industries. So when I'm gonna look at this, my natural gas demand is not going down. My natural gas demand is there, but unfortunately, I'm not able to meet my demand with the supply. I'm trying to utilize whatever supply I have here. Now let's look at demand projections. The McKinsey and Company has come up with the demand projections which they have suggested comparing a base year of 2010, and they have developed a scenario for 2030 considering the business as usual scenarios. Considering this, they said in 2010 the requirement of crude oil was 166 million tons of oil equivalent, whereas by 2030 the requirement is going to be 373 million tons of oil equivalent. That means that there is going to be a growth of approximately more than 100%, that is, let's say 105, 110% compared to what was the demand in 2010 to 2030. Gas, the case of gas is no longer different here. The gas requirement or the demand of my natural gas in the year of 2010 was approximately, or let's say was 53 million tons of oil equivalent, which has been projected to be 113 million tons of oil equivalent. Again, the demand is growing a bit more than 100%. Here I'm not saying that the nuclear or the renewables are not going to make much difference. When I'm gonna look at my nuclear contribution, it is more than 300%. When I'm gonna look at the renewables, again, it's going to be higher compared to what it was earlier. And when I'm going to look at the compounded annual growth rate you could see a huge growth happening in nuclear and renewables. That means the growth is going to happen for nuclear energy at a percentage of 8.4%, whereas for renewable is 8%. But when I look those percentage numbers for liquids and gas, those numbers are lesser compared to what's renewable and nuclear. So yes, renewable and nuclear is going to come in a big way, but liquids and gas, crude oil and gas is going not going anywhere. It's going to be there with a much bigger demand. Now, let's look what is the role of oil and gas in my Indian economy. The first one is it is the basic transportation fuel that I use. Approximately about 48 to 51% of my crude oil requirement goes for transportation sector. Agriculture sector is basically being supported by my oil and gas for their power generations. The industries that is present in India needs energy, which is basically being met by the oil and gas, light and heating purposes. The petrochemicals, as I said when I started my presentation, the shirt I wear is a mixture of polyester and cotton. The polyester is a petrochemical product which basically is from a raw material, naphtha, which is a petroleum product. The PVC, the polyvinyl chloride, the plastic that we use is basically comes from naphtha, which is a byproduct of crude oil, or it's a petroleum product. So the oil and gas has a major impact not only on the industries but also on our day-to-day activities. Let it be the transportation, let it be a necessity energy, LPG, or let it be the PNG, or let it be the petrol and diesel that I would require. The lighting facilities, the lights, that the electricity generation through my diesel generators, the petrochemical products, these all are going to impact or is impacting my day-to-day life. When I'm talking about the industrial generation, whatever the industries are producing, they need energy to produce that particular output. And the growth of any economy is based upon whatever my country is going to produce. And for that, oil and gas is required, or an energy source is required, which as of date, the majorly consumed source is oil and gas. Again, when I'm going to look at oil and gas industry, is considered to be a part of India's six core industries, along with steel, iron, fertilizer, power, etc. Oil and gas contributes approximately about 34.4% to my primary energy consumption, along with coal, which again has a huge percentage of contribution to the primary energy. When I'm going to look at the numbers, 38% of ports and 7% of the railway traffic are basically comprised of the petroleum sector cargo. And oil and gas is one of the biggest contributors to both the central and state treasuries. So when I'm going to look how they are going to be the biggest contributors to both the central and state treasuries, you could see on my left hand side table, what I've did was I've just taken how much the contribution of overall PSUs is, and out of this how much is oil and gas PSUs, that means public sector undertakings are contributing. And you could see 63% of the share of the entire contribution of PSUs in India, 63% is contributed by oil and gas PSUs. And when I say PSUs, which includes the ONGC, IOCL, PPCL, HPCL, and in other sectors, you could look at BSNL, you could look at BHEL, you could look at NTPC, the various major public sector undertakings. Oil and gas majorly shares the contribution. On my right hand side, I have given certain set of states, and the second column says the total sales tax collected by that particular state, and the third column suggests the sales tax collected by that particular state on petroleum products. You could see that majority of the states, more than 25% of share on the sales tax comes from the petroleum product. When I look at Rajasthan, it's 33%. That means Rajasthan has collected a total of 18,575 crore rupees in total sales tax, out of which 6,045 crores was contributed by the sales tax of petroleum products. When I'm going to look at Gujarat, it's 35%. When I'm going to look at Bihar, it's again 35%. So the majority of, or let's say, the petroleum product sales tax that I'm going to make a payment, the sales tax payment, the majority, or let's say the oil and gas petroleum products has a major share. In this, I have not considered the royalties that's been paid by the company to the state governments. Oh, I have not considered the excise duty or the other duties that's been paid by these companies, the oil companies. I've just considered the sales tax that's been paid in a petrol retail outlet as well as in a LPG, what do you call LPG agency. This slide basically discusses about how my oil and gas sector is. Towards the downside, you can see the upstream, the downstream, and then the gas business. Whereas when you look across the slide, you could see that I'm talking about the central government, the state government, and the private companies that is doing business. When I'm going to look at the upstream, we have the PSUs like ONGC, Oil India Limited. We have companies like BPCL, GAIL, etc., who is now doing upstream business also. And we have GSPC, the Gujarat state-based company, who is again in the upstream business. And we have certain private players like Reliance, SR, Kane, and others who is basically doing business, upstream business. When I'm talking about upstream, it is the exploration and production business in the country. Whereas when I look at the refining side, we have IOCL, Indian Oil Corporation, we have Bharat Petroleum Corporation or Hindustan Petroleum Corporation, who are basically the public sector undertaking refineries. Whereas we have some of the refineries like Reliance and SR and HMEL, which is a joint venture with HPCL. These are some of the private refineries again who is in business. And when I'm looking at the retail outlet business, I have IOCL, BPCL, and HPCL, the PSUs, who have a major share of my retail business, whereas the private players like Reliance, SR, and Shell is currently coming up with their own petrol retail outlets to capture the market. And as I said in my previous slides, approximately 50%, that means 48 to 51% of whatever I produce, I'm talking about whatever I produce and whatever I import, that means let's say whatever my demand is basically contributed to the transportation sector. Approximately 18% goes to the agriculture sector, and the industrial sector consumes approximately 11%. When I look at LNG terminal, in my previous slide, I was discussing about my infrastructure development that has been required. I have Petronet LNG and Shell having their own LNG terminal who regasifies the LNG that's been imported to normal natural gas, which could be sent across to the industries, to the power sector or to the fertilizer sector or for city gas distribution. When I'm looking at the consumption side, 41% of whatever supply of natural gas I have is being consumed by the power industry. 25% of whatever my natural gas supply is basically being consumed by the fertilizer industry, and the rest of the sector takes approximately the rest of the 34% of whatever the supply is. Now let's look at what are the challenges and opportunities that basically exist in this particular sector. Looking at the challenges faced by the industry, one of the challenges that's been faced by the industry is the political risk or handling the government pressure. The primary way that politics can affect oil is only in the regulatory sense, but it's not necessarily the only way. Typically, an oil and gas company is covered by a range of regulations that limit where, when, and how the extraction has to be done. And this interpretation of laws and regulations can also differ from state to state. That said, the political risk generally increases when an oil and gas company are working on oil and gas reserves abroad. Say, for an example, OVL, GAIL, BRPL, REPDMCC, who basically the subsidiary units of our public sector undertaking or the private companies who goes abroad for acquiring the assets. Usually, the companies tend to prefer countries with stable political systems and a history of granting and enforcing long-term leases. However, some of the companies simply go where the oil and gas is, even if a particular country doesn't match their preferences. And when you look at this, the political risk is similar. Even the physical terms, the worsening physical terms, is the same what's happening for the last few years. So nothing much to be worried about. Whereas something that needs to be worried is the price volatility, which has been increasing. For an upstream company, that means for an exploration and production company, if the crude oil price decreases, like what is happening in the last 1.5 or 2 years, for an upstream company, that means for an E&P company, it is not financially good because earlier the price of crude oil was $110 per barrel. Now they are only getting, let's say, $50 per barrel or $52 per barrel. But again, the price is volatile in nature. You cannot predict what tomorrow's price is going to be. And the good news for the oil and gas companies is yesterday, the OPEC country have taken a decision to cut down their production so as to increase the prices of the crude oil. Whereas when the crude oil prices are lesser, it is good for downstream companies like the refineries, the retailers, because the raw material cost for them has come down. So the either way, if the price comes down, the price of crude oil comes down, for an upstream company, it is not that good. When I take an example, in the last 2 years, approximately $600 billion worth of projects have not been started, which were supposed to be started, they never took off. Whereas in the last 2 years, the refineries, that means the downstream companies, the refineries, the oil marketing companies were actually enjoying the benefits of a lower raw material cost. When I look at the other perspective, when the crude oil price increases for an upstream company, it is always very good because they are getting a much better price for the crude oil. Whereas for a downstream company, their raw material cost is basically being increased. So that is one of the price volatility is one of the basic challenges faced by the industry. Let's look at the geological risk, or let's say the uh, frontier acreage and access to reserve on the strategic side. The frontier acreage challenge represents exploration development of new fields that previously regarded as too difficult or as too expensive or as too politically unstable to justify the operations. And I'm not forgetting about the remote locations like the Arctic, the far North Sea, the pre-salt basins in deep water of Brazil, etc. Because those are a difficult terrain reserves. Access to reserves involves a tremendous competition. by the companies to get an acreage is again one of the basic challenges being faced by the companies in the oil and gas industry as of date. I'm sorry. Another challenge that has been faced is the human capital deficit. This is an EY report I have taken. EY report says that there is a requirement of approximately, this is a 2013 report that I've taken, which says that there is a requirement of around 25,000 additional professionals in the next 5 years. And approximately about 50% of employees that is working in oil and companies today have more than 20 years of experience, and majority of this 50% is going to retire in the next 10 years. That means approximately 11% is going to retire in another 5 years, and a few more is going to retire in another next 5 more years. That means in overall in 10 years, a majority of this 50% of employees is going to retire. And the skill sets in this particular industry, oil and gas industry, are highly specialized and is difficult to develop and acquire, which is again suggested to be one of the major challenges. And again, if I go back to my previous slide, the challenge, the human capital deficit on the operation side is increasing. It's more, the science shows more. Now the question comes here is, are these the challenges? Oh, I'll cut down the question here of problem or challenge. Are these the opportunity for the younger generation like us? The first challenge was human capital. That means my deficit of my human capital here. The next challenge was my demand of crude oil and natural gas is going to increase. I have shown you the data which the reports of McKinsey and Company, or which the reports of PwC. I have shown those reports on my previous slides. For an oil company, yes, it's a challenge, but for us, is it a challenge or is it an opportunity? So my question to you guys is, are you ready to convert these challenges to our opportunity? I know that the demand is going to increase. When the demand is going to increase, obviously the supply has to increase. That means I need more people. The present state already have a deficit of human capital. That means again I need more people. Again, when I'm going to go for difficult terrains, I need better technology. For those, I need better people who could develop those, who could use those technology. So my question is, are you ready to take up these challenges to be your opportunity? And I'm going to discuss on how MBA oil and gas is going to make the difference. The highly qualified faculty that we have, who have been working in the middle and the higher level management of multinational companies, the visiting faculty that we have, who have already been in the position of executive director level of a multi-billion-dollar business, the curriculum which is industry ready. That means every year the industry people comes down, reviews the curriculum and suggests what is required, what is today's talk, what is going to be tomorrow's requirement. So the curriculum, the visiting faculty, the faculty. So let's look how this program of MBA oil and gas is going to be unique. As I said, it's a specialized in oil and gas as a domain program wherein approximately 40 40%, I exactly don't remember the number, but that's the reason I use approximately 40% of the curriculum is based on the oil and gas subjects, ranging from technology to the business aspect of oil and gas. Let's take an example, starting with the understanding of natural gas business, the petrochemical business, energy and utilities, fundamentals of petroleum explorations, fundamentals of refining, wherein both the technological part as well as the business aspects are being discussed. The rest of the approximately 60% of the courses are basically your normal MBA subjects like HR, like resource methodology, quantitative techniques, which again as a manager you require. One is you need to understand what is oil and gas, how oil and gas business works. You also need to have those managerial skills and MBA education is going to give. And MBA oil and gas is a mix of this niche oil and gas market with the core MBA subjects. 100% of the domain course faculty are from industry who have worked at middle or senior level management. So, for an example, the professor and head of our department of oil and gas have approximately about a total of 33 years of experience. That is the best example I could use here. I have approximately 9 years of experience, both industry research as well as the academics. And we have other faculty coming from the consulting area. We have Professor Pankaj, who have been with the multinationals in the likes of Shell, etc., Shell, Castrol, etc., who have been working with us and taking or delivering these domain courses. Ours is a practical based learning approach. We know that we cannot teach you business by textbook knowledge or by just giving you material and saying like boss this is what it is. We cannot teach that, and we have a practical based learning approach where we basically use management games, we basically use softwares to teach, we use case studies, we take you to industries so that whatever you have studied in the classroom you can have a touch and feel. If, say for an example, 3 years back we have taken the students to an oil rig, wherein when we teach the students saying like what a BOP is, when we have taken the students to a working oil rig, they could touch and see how an oil rig looks like, what exactly is the working. And the best part that I could suggest here is UPES has a workover oil rig here, which is again being used to teach MBA oil and gas students. When we teach students LNG or how the regasification happens, again 2 years back we have taken the students to Petronet LNG in the Dahej, and they could have a hands-on experience on how the regasification happens. Not only on the domain and the non-domain based courses, we also give special trainings to students on SAP, on Primavera, on SQL, etc., so as to add on to your employability. Industry academia interaction is another major attraction of our program in the university. Every year, approximately about 30 plus industry experts comes down to deliver a lecture on a particular topic. And when I talk industry experts, I'm not just talking about a lower level management person. I'm talking about higher upper level management people also. Collaborations. We have collaborations with various industries or various companies in oil and gas industry. Summer internship, when I'm going to look at last year's record, we have 100% summer internship record. That means all my students were given an internship opportunity with a company. Co-teaching, that means again, other than the visiting faculty who's going to look at an entire subject in a particular subject which has been taught by a domain course faculty, a full-time faculty, I basically brings an industry expert to deliver a particular module so that the students would get a different perspective than what the faculty's perspective is. Now, as I said, we bring industry experts or to speak on a particular topic. These are some of the people that have come in the last 2 years. Padma Bhushan Sri B.K. Chaturvedi, member of Niti Aayog, who spoke on management of issues in oil and gas industry. We had Mr. Prabhat Singh. This year we had Mr. Prabhat Singh, MD, Petron LNG. Last year we had Mr. Rajan K. Pillai, MD of ISPRL, that is Indian Strategic Petroleum Reserves Limited. We had again last year we had last academic year we had Mr. S. Krishnan, the chairperson of PNGRB. Last year we had Mr. Rajiv Mathur, MD MGL. This year we had Mr. Narendra Kumar, MD IGL. This year we had Mr. Mahendra Kumar, ex-CEO of Reliance Energy Trading. So this year we had Mr. Sanjay Joshi, the director of ORF. So these is just a small glimpse of the list. And approximately last year we had about 35 different guest lectures. You can see on the bottom, you can see Basdev Mohanty, the member PNGRB, which is a regulator for the oil and gas business in India. On the middle, you can see Mr. Karunakaran Hari, who was delivering lecture to the oil and gas students. He was the head of commercial department K in India, whereas presently is the country head for Transfigura. And even you can see Mr. Rajat, who is from Los Alamos National Laboratory, US. As I said, these are some of the companies where we have taken our students in the last 2-3 years so that they could have a touch and feel of whatever they have been taught in the classrooms. Now, let's look at what is the role and opportunity of an oil and gas manager in information technology enabled services industry. When I'm going to look at, this is the glimpse of our recruiter. This is not a bigger picture. This is a small picture of some of our recruiters in the last 3 years. Whereas when I look, KPIT, Tieto, Wipro, Accenture, Infosys are the ITES companies who comes down to a campus to recruit from MBA oil and gas. Mahanagar Gas, Gulf Oil, Reliance, HPCL, Linde, Total, Crisil, EY, Castrol, KPMG is just a small glimpse. And the rest of the companies, if I'm going to put, I would require more slides, which that's the reason I have shown a glimpse of my recruiters. Now, what I did here was I just taken I have looked at two of the ITES companies, energy division, wherein on the right hand side you could see here this is the division where they have chemicals as one of the sector, natural resources as another sector, utilities as a third sector, and energy as the fourth sector. The question comes is why IT? For every industry to work, I need to have softwares. I need to have consulting services. I need to have support services. And ITES companies basically helps me with that. And it's $1 billion business in our country. So when you're going to look at the 4 different sectors of energy division in a particular ITES company, my students are being trained so that they could not only go to the core companies but also to an ITES company so that they could work in any of these 4 different verticals in the energy division. When I'm going to look at the specialization of these ITES companies, the CRM, the customer relations management, finance and performance management, risk management, strategy, supply chain management. The students, once they do their MBA in oil and gas management, they are actually earning those skills that is required so as to meet, so as to ensure that they could work on these profiles. And that is the reason why these ITES companies comes back to our campus so as to recruit our students. Again, what I've done was I've just looked at the application and consulting side of ITES companies, wherein if I just look at the business services, the supply chain management, manufacturing execution systems, product lifecycle management, business process management, customer relations management, my students are being trained for supply chain management, for product lifecycle management, for business process management, for customer relationship management, so that they could get those jobs. These are some of the applications, or let's say the consulting profiles: enterprise resource planning, mergers and acquisitions, human resource management. And again, these are some of the areas where we specialize in and we help our students to get jobs. I'm not saying only ITES companies are coming. ITES is a percentage of companies who comes. And my role was to educate you what is the role that comes into. When I'm going to look at the skill sets developed by the students in our campus, in the front office, the students are unable, or they do have an understanding of the energy markets, energy economics. They have the analytical skills along with operations and material management and logistics and supply chain management skills. Whereas when I'm going to look at a middle office management, hedging strategies and instruments, risk measurement, developing of economic models, fundamentals and technical analysis, and understanding of statistical and technical tools, again, my students are getting those understandings here, which they could support to the various core companies that comes to my campus for recruitment, to ITES companies, to the research organization, to the consulting organization who comes to recruit from us. And when I look at the back office, energy industry accounting, trade procedures and documentation, settlements, research, and these are some of the skill set that are basically being developed by my students. And I'm ready to take if you have any further questions on this presentation. And I would like to thank you for patiently listening to my talk. Okay, there was a question which asked, does the earlier slide prove high employment in oil and gas industry in next 5 to 10 years? My answer to this is no one could predict what is going to be the future. But when we look at the statistics, what we could see is in the next 5 to 10 years, we are going to see a huge requirement of people, or let's say we are going to see, I'm sorry, we are going to see a huge retirement of people from companies in India. And obviously, or let's say, I'm just assuming here, I'm not giving you any promises, I'm just assuming if there is going to be a retirement, obviously someone has to take up those positions, and that would be by the immediate junior of that particular person who has been retired. And when the chain continues, there would obviously be a position needs to be vacant, which needs to be filled. So I'm not giving you any promises here, but I was just looking at the statistics and my common sense that if there is a retirement, there has to be a recruitment. Okay, there is another question which asks, does an MBA in oil and gas narrows a person's employability? The question itself has an answer. You first are an MBA, then you have specialized in oil and gas, and that is the reason in my presentation I have said approximately 60% of the courses that we teach is your managerial skills. When I'm gonna look at some of my alumni who are being placed, I have my alumni placed in the research organizations, in the consulting organizations like E&Y, Accenture, or Accenture Management Consulting. I have them in KPMGs. I have them in PwC. Along, other than that, I have some of entrepreneurs in my, some of the alumni are now entrepreneurs who have started their own companies, which is nothing to do with oil and gas. And I have alumni who is working with the normal business organizations. So always we tell to our students, first you are an MBA student, or first you are an MBA, and then comes your specialization, which is icing on the cake. So I think I have answered. It gives you opportunities to work in oil and gas, and being an MBA, it gives you opportunities to work in generic industries too, as an whatever an MBA profile fits you to. Okay, there was a question, what might be the scope of MBA in oil and gas more than MBA in finance and HRM? Okay, as discussed in my earlier slide, if I go back, the skill sets developed by my students in MBA oil and gas, along with the skills that you're going to acquire in the business. Let's say, for an example, the HRM, the finance. Because when I'm going to look at my MBA program, in the first, second, and the third semester, the students are taught finance. So I have students who is presently working in the finance profile. When I'm going to look at human resource management, again, HRM is a subject that's been taught in my MBA program, and again, I have alumni who is working as a HR in companies, and that alumni was called to a campus last month. That was this month to be precise, on the 3rd of September, to discuss on the corporate expectations to my current passing out batch. Along with those skills of finance and HR, my MBA oil and gas students are also acquiring the skills on hedging strategies, on understanding the energy economics, on understanding the statistical and technical tools that could be used on a research industry. And not only that, they are understanding what is energy market. Now, when I look at to my last year's placement records, that means the 2016 passed out batches record, we had Reliance coming down to our campus to recruit our students, and the profile given was marketing. But they came down because the students knows oil and gas was an icing to to their marketing skills. Same is the case with Total Oil. We had masters coming down for for a finance profile, and oil and gas was an icing to it. So when I'm going to look at the finance and HRM, yes, it's been taught in our subject in our course, and we also tailor finance courses as per oil and gas requirement also, which again add values to the student. So oil and gas skills is again an icing which is going to help getting your placements. And when I'm going to say it helps, and I'm not guaranteeing that it will, but yes, the past experiences have shown that my students are being placed with companies with various profiles of finance, HR, marketing, because they also acquire these skills in our MBA program. Do you have any queries that needs clarifications? Please, you could always ask on the comments box. There was a question to name a few companies that recruit OG managers. Again, when I go back to my previous slides, This is a glance of some of our recruiters in the last 3 years. Wherein if I'm going to look at my last year recruiters, Guilfoyle was has recruited from our campus last year. Reliance Industries Limited has recruited last year. HPCL has campus recruited three of my students. Linde has again recruited us. Total Oil has recruited again from, when I say last year, I'm meaning 2016 passed out batch. That means the recently passed out batch. Then the Crisil again has come down to recruit. Crisil was there last year again to recruit from my batch. Then when I'm going to look at ITES companies, I had KPIT, Theatre Corporation, which is a Finnish company, Wipro, Accenture, recruiting from my last passed out 2016 passed out batch. A year before again I had Castrol, we had Infosys, we had the other companies who have come down. So this is just a glimpse wherein I have not put the entire list of recruiters from MB Oil and Gas. And I hope I have answered to your question. The next question was, what is the average package over other students? When I'm going to look at MB Oil and Gas in the last passed out batch, that means 2016 May passed out batch, the average package was approximately 5.7 to 5.9 lakhs per annum. And this is an average wherein between the highest and the lowest packages. And the highest package has gone up to approximately on a range of 11 lakhs, 11 point on some number after 11. I think it was 11.7 something, but I'm not pretty sure, but it was a bit more than 11 lakhs per annum. And if I'm going to look at the ITES companies average package in the uh, uh, last passed out batch, that means 2016 passed out batch, it was a bit over 6 lakhs per annum. Okay, another question that has come across is what is the full form of ITES? ITES is Information Technology Enabled Services. That means when I'm going to look at Wipro, we say it's an IT company. When we're going to look at Accenture, we say it's an IT company. But these companies provides required support services to oil and gas companies. Let's say it would be developing a solution for drilling, it would be developing a solution for the transportation, any on the value chain of oil and gas. We call them as the enable services in information technology. So ITES is information technology enable services. And in this slide, whatever I have marked in red over here, whatever over here, these companies are ITES companies. If you have any more questions, I'm happy to address those questions. If you have anything more, please type on the comments. Oh, sorry, please type on the uh, right hand side of the YouTube view, your questions so that I could address those. Thank you, and it was a pleasure to answer the questions that has been put across by some of the aspirants. And see you soon. Thanks a lot. And